Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Paradox Untold Stories from Athletic Directors. We are very excited to be back this week with our guest, Rich Barton. How are you today?
Good, good. It's morning time out here in the western states, and glad to be a part of your podcast.
Well, we're so happy you're here. So thank you for being here, and also thank you to Take It Spigot for being our sponsor and making this and every episode of Paradox possible. So I'm gonna hand it right over to you, Dustin, so you can introduce um, Rich today, and we can get started with some stories.
I think I've gotten a bad reputation in the way I introduce people. But the reality is, when you have somebody of Rich's caliber, the, Daniel, I'm sure you've had people apply for jobs that have a resume that's like 47 pages long, and you're trying to get through all the accolades and all the
Of course.
accomplishments and all the things that they have done. Have you not?
Oh, I definitely have.
Yeah, well, today is no different. Rich Barton is man, I don't even know where to start. Other than Rich and I spent some quality time together in March in the Arkansas State AD conference. Watched a lot of basketball. Got to spend some time breaking bread together, having some fellowship, but also just diving into who Rich is. And then I got the opportunity to. This will show you the roles that we have. I chauffeured Rich to the airport. It was an hour and a half drive. I took him to the airport, made sure he got off, sent off like he was supposed to. I
Made
was
sure I had the
responsible.
right. Made sure I had the right bag.
Make sure he had the right bag, which is another story we can talk about later. But Rich Barton is an AD out in Utah, and we'll talk about exactly where here in a little bit. But Rich is a former, well, I guess they call him past president of the NIAAA board. He's he to me is a great friend. I know I said that last week with Willie Spears, and Rich may dispute that as well because Willie disputed it. But Rich has been a mentor, a friend, just a person who's invested in our profession and personally invested in me, which I am grateful for. And we have a mutual friend, and well, we have several mutual friends, but one that's mentor for me is Doug Kilgore, who we've mentioned a couple times on this podcast. But Rich and Doug are good buddies as well. So it is my distinct privilege and honor to introduce Rich Barton as our guest today on the podcast. And Rich, before we get going, let's tell our listeners a little bit about who Rich Barton is, something that the resume is not going to tell us. Don't tell us the 47 pages that you have on your resume. Just tell us a little bit about who Rich Barton is and what Rich Barton likes to do outside of this athletic administration world.
Well, I guess probably not a lot of people would know, and my resume would say is I was had my start in life in a rural town of about 600 people. If at that high school, one of the smaller ones in the state of Utah. Um, Went to seventh grade in the high school. My father passed away when I was 9, and my mom remarried when I was 13, and so moved to the big city of Cedar City, about you know uh, 18,000 people at that time, and so had, I guess, you'd call humble beginnings, and you know I'm grateful for those roots that I had from a small rural place, and also from a great mother that was a widow at 35 with four kids, and fortunate to learn a work ethic from. She's the hardest working person I've known, and her influence is something that's led me uh, above all else through my life, and helping me to know I could do hard things. Um, I guess, speaking of what's not on the resume, or something maybe people don't know about me, uh, if I wasn't in this profession, I think I'd probably be a financial planner, because that's something that I've always maybe taken an interest in, and it's always been intriguing to me how people choose to live their lives financially. And I another unique thing for me was when I was about age 33, I was called to be a bishop of my congregation, which is the primary leader of the spiritual, physical, temporal welfare, emotional welfare of a congregation of 500 people. And that was one of the things that also I had to deal with, people and their finances, people that were in our church or people that lived in our boundaries of our congregation. And that was a non-paid, uh, which I would call a full-time job. In addition to, that's when I got out of basketball coaching. But even during that 7-year calling, I was also the president of the UIAAA and a full-time assistant principal and an AD. And so a lot of things on my plate, but all made possible by the support of a good wife, and also had a great principal during that period of time at my school that allowed me at a moment's notice to go help anybody in crisis, or go to the church for Tuesday night interviews and involvement with our youth groups and things as well.
Now, what Rich said, he had humble beginnings, and what he's not telling you is Rich was also a basketball player at the collegiate level. And if we had Steve Throne here right now, Steve and Rich probably look eye to eye.
Yeah, Steve's a big one. There's somebody bigger from the state of Delaware, and that's Big Mike. If you've ever ran into Big Mike, he's got me by about 2 or 3 inches, I think. That
So what Dustin's trying to say is you really like airplanes and sitting on airplanes.
yeah, I'm fortunate. I think about 80-90% of the time I end up on the exit row. I think they just feel sorry for the people that might have to sit in front of me. But,
So what Rich doesn't like about airplanes is he's been known to grab the wrong luggage. Is that correct, Rich?
hey, one time, and I'll never hear the end of it.
Did you take it home with you before you realized that
No,
this
but
was
I
wrong?
took it to Hot Springs, Arkansas, about an hour and a half away from the airport, and I really did feel bad for the person that I took their bag, because they were identical bags.
Here's the beauty, and I'm going to tell this story simply because I have Rich here and he's a captive audience, but and we're the hosts, so we can control whether or not he leaves, I guess. But so Rich arrives on a Wednesday for our state conference. Doug Kilgore picks him up, brings him in, and they just throw their bags in the room and they come down to the conference and are part of what we're doing. And we did something that evening where we were all together and hung out. And so once we got done, they went to the condo and they come early the next morning, and I see Rich, and he's wearing the exact same outfit he had on the day before. I mean, head to toe, the exact same outfit. And I was like, "Hey, Rich, good morning. Casual day, I get.
At least you could have done is gave me a Arkansas polo or something."
So it was then that I found out that he had grabbed the wrong luggage, not on purpose. He had grabbed the wrong luggage, but he didn't realize it. He
Till
arrived
10 o'clock that night, which was a little too late to, I called them. They weren't in to do the baggage change till the next morning. So,
did they take yours?
No, it was there at the airport.
Oh.
So, but there weren't anybody there at the, I think it was American Airlines office until the next morning. So
at what point, Rich, in this scenario, did you open up the luggage and think, "Oh shoot, this isn't mine"?
Yeah, it was about 10 o'clock, and Doug and I were at the condo on the lake, and we had just got to the point of, through visiting and things, ready to retire for the night. And I'm like, well, better brush my teeth and, do the nightly routine. And I open up that bag and start pulling out some things that aren't mine. And I said very loudly to Doug, who was down the hall in his room, I said, I can't believe it.
And the best part of this story is that Doug Kilgore always has travel woes. There's always a predicament when he travels. And Rich and I had joked about this, and maybe we should blame Doug because he's the one who picked you up, and it kind of just by osmosis happened to you. You've had your travel.
There was a rub off effect there. That's what we'll call it, right?
So I mean, I can't imagine being in that spot, what I'd end up doing. And maybe it is me because Willie talked about it last week in our episode about how he had to go buy a whole new wardrobe when he came to speak in Arkansas one time. So it's either Arkansas, me, or Doug, and I'm going to go with the latter on all of that. So, Rich, let's paint the picture geographically speaking of where you're at, where you're located, and what your roles are there at the school you serve.
Yeah, and our school, Richfield High School in Richfield, Utah. So we're located in the center of the state, a couple hours from Salt Lake City, a couple hours south. And then as far as proximity to Las Vegas, about 3.5 hours from Las Vegas. I started out here 29 years ago as a coach and a teacher. I continued, from my bachelor's, I started my master's right off the bat, my first year of teaching. And I was fortunate to get one of the 6 Division I NCAA postgraduate scholarships in men's basketball. And so I used that with my master's and my administrative endorsement. And 5 years after my first 5 years, the assistant principal and AD retired, and I had said I'm willing to take that position on one condition, that I can still coach. And so uniquely, I was the boys basketball coach, full-time assistant principal and AD, and I did those roles for 6 years. And then when I got called as a church bishop, I knew something had to come off my plate, and really the only thing that could at that time was the boys basketball. And so it also was a blessing, because now I had some opportunities to get a little more heavily involved in our state AD association, and to go to a national conference, because with the winter basketball coaching, I had never gone to a national conference. And then I had one of our past presidents of the UIAAA called me up one night it was about 10:30, and I go to bed early when I can, because I'm a 4 a.m. Early riser to exercise. But he called me up and he says, "You're going to run for president-elect." And the next morning, I told my wife Sheila, I said, "I'm not sure, but I might have." In a stupor of being woke up late in a deep sleep, I said I might have agreed to run for president of our state association. Nothing that I'd ever considered doing, and that led to some other opportunities, involvement wise. I got asked to be on the NIAAA third strategic plan, which that's another story. We probably don't have time to share, but long story short, I got off the plane, went and had my appendix taken out a couple hours after I got off the plane.
It is his first duty, right? That was
Yeah,
your first trip there
yeah,
of the strategic plan.
yeah, and the next morning I was supposed to stay for a little longer, stay at the hospital, but the next morning I got up and got dressed and said, they didn't fly me here just to have surgery and stay in a hospital, and I felt bad missing the get together the night before and things, and so Mike Blackburn came to check on me, and I was fully dressed and ready to go, and they put me in a nice, comfortable chair for the next couple of days of meetings, and I was fortunate to still be able to be a part of that, and hopefully they got to know that I'm, a committed member to the NIAAA. And the worst part about the whole experience was the getting back home, because they had a Midwest or through that part of the country, they had a snowstorm the day we were supposed to fly out. Instead of getting back to Salt Lake City at 3:30 in the afternoon, got sent to Atlanta and didn't get out of Atlanta until midnight. And my wife and her parents had driven to the airport because they wouldn't let me drive home. The doctor wouldn't clear me to drive home from the airport, and I'm a couple hours away. And so I think I got into the airport at 12 hours later than I was supposed to, at about 3:30 in the morning. And needless to say, I was suffering at that point, health-wise, physically. But
So did the committee know that you were committed, or did they need to commit you to somewhere and try to get you some help?
well, yeah, that's probably a better term for it. Is they probably needed to commit me somewhere. But but it was a memorable first trip to Indianapolis. I've gone quite a few since, and that one was, fortunately, all the others have been a lot better trips to Indianapolis.
So is there any truth to, you said you're at Richfield Schools, is there any truth to that school being named after you and some guy named Field?
No, no truth, but you know my Twitter handle, at Richfield Rich, and this is my wife's hometown. And in fact, my first few years on the job, I was fortunate to. Her father was the longtime school counselor here, and so my first 3 years was he was here on the job, and it's a great community. We I know sometimes with my trips home from the airport and things, I'm definitely getting home a lot later than most people that travel in the NIAAA. But I always say uh, that's okay. I live where the traffic's not frustrating, and I live where the air is breathable, and it's a nice part of the world to live. I live within traveling distance to about 5 national parks. The north rim of the Grand Canyon is probably about 3.5 hours away.
Well, if you want to talk about places that the traffic isn't bad, I live in a town of less than 9,000 people. So, and I live 3 blocks from my office, so I can walk. So traffic really isn't bad when you walk. But, so
I'm
there's
not.
absolutely no truth to Richfield being named after you.
No. They probably have thought about changing the name since I've been in leadership positions. So sometimes assistant principals aren't always the most popular people with some of the hard things you have to do.
But and it's not the most sought after job either. So they might have found a sucker that said he'd do
Right.
it, and they just kept him in that role.
That's right. Yeah.
So now that we've got a little background on you, Rich, the purpose of what we do is just try to have some fun, have some laughs, and tell stories. Do you have a story for us that you can start our day off with?
Well, when I read that in the email, I thought, well, I don't know as I can top Becky Moran's streaker from the stands, and I know you've had some good ones, but Well, I mentioned to you off the air, we're a three high school district, and and the one to the south is there's a pretty good rivalry between the two schools. In fact, I tell people, we have, even some of the biggest schools in the state. I said, we can have a volleyball game with our school and theirs, and it's standing room only. You know, people that don't go to games go to those contests just so the next day they're involved in the water cooler conversations. And and we've had a lot of hijinks in the weeks of any kind of game with them, whether it's a contest in the fall or in the winter. And we had it was the last football game of the season, the one year, and it was going to be played at our opponent's school, our rival school's field. And and we've already done the extra uh, law enforcement at the building through the evening hours. We do it at our school, they do it at theirs, to try to make sure they can catch anything. As far as we're the Wildcats, we've gotten the kitty litter spread around all of our school grounds and things. We've
Like
had.
on purpose, or somebody else did that?
Oh yeah, yeah. Their students have done
Oh,
it.
so not your students.
No.
Okay.
And,
Like as
we've
a prank, Dustin, they're putting kitty litter because
Right. I'm with you,
I need
but
to catch you up here.
I mean, I don't know what things out in the West happens. I mean, that may be, I mean, we talked to Cole Canyer and he talked about live chickens in his game. So I don't know if this was a
no,
planned deal or not.
any way to take some shots at us. We've had kids put toilets on their doorsteps over there to their school. But we
Wow.
this particular year uh, got we started getting phone calls, as soon as we got to school, and we had found out that there was a dead ram sheep hanging from their was attached to some chains hanging from their goalpost. That their
Like a real
custodial
one.
staff had noticed that very morning, and their mascot is the Rams, and so they had
What, like
some people.
a real
Yeah,
ram sheep.
yeah, it had chains connected to its neck. It
Oh
had been strung
no.
up over the goalpost on their football field where the game was going to be played later that night.
Oh.
So somebody over there had also called
Oh.
all of the media stations in Salt Lake City. So all four media outlets were obviously trying to get a story on this, and so our school phone was ringing off the hook for the principal and I to talk to him. We didn't talk to him, and give it a few hours now. Some of their media trucks are uh, parked next to the school as close as they can. They're trying to get kids to interview kids and things. And meanwhile, we're communicating with the other school's administration. We're trying to find out who did it, as we had with some other hijinks problems between the two schools. We've worked together to try to find out some things, and there wasn't surveillance on their football field, so that didn't help. They probably had law enforcement that had watched around the school, but not able to monitor the football field for all the hours in the evening. But we actually did find out who had done it, and there was some pretty good police work and things, but they had gone to with the chains that had been connected to the dead ram and hung over, the goalpost. The local Walmart uh, or SRO and things had gone there, and one of our senior football players had used a credit card to buy those chains, and they had him on surveillance. And so they came and shared that surveillance with us. We pulled the kid in, and of course he starts going through all this dishonesty. No, I didn't do anything. And they show him the surveillance pictures and things, and and he was busted. And there was one of his teammates, and then two or three other students that weren't participants. And so those two kids didn't play in a football game that was pretty crucial, last regular season region league game. And the winner of that game was actually going to advance in the playoffs. And we were a clear favorite in that game. That was one of the bad things about it, is it actually motivated our opponents, and they beat us that day. But those kids got some uh, disciplinary measures besides just missing the game and things. But it was one of those crazy deals. We're rural Utah. We don't see these big media trucks with satellite dishes on. There were at least three of the four news stations in Salt Lake City had their trucks there, doing stories on the game and things. But it was
It's just I'm trying to like compute all of this as you're talking, and there's just so many blanks I need you to fill in for me. So first of all, I want to rewind a little bit to where you casually said, "Well, the custodians noticed it in the morning." Like, that's something to notice
what a
for,
sight! What a sight!
right?
Right?
Like, just casually notice this.
I'll tell
But
you this too. Where we live, I mean, I know farmers that they hear some gunshots out in their field. They're going to grab their gun and maybe go shoot somebody.
I can
They were a
imagine.
little fortunate in whose field they were in, because also part of that story is we heard that they'd shot another one, but they weren't able to kill it.
So they shot this ram?
Yes.
Oh my. I mean, I am all for a good prank and kids and athletes having fun, but this is just like a little step too far
A
for
little.
hurting an animal. And I'm just, did they find the other ram? Is the other ram, did he
I, I
make it?
I didn't ever hear the end of that story, and they could have ended up with a farmer who was going to press charges and really went after him. They were pretty fortunate with who it was, and the repercussions could have been a
What
lot.
was that phone call like when you first got a phone call that told you about this situation? Like, I want to know, like, what.
It was from the school administration over there, and we weren't shocked we got a phone call, because it is rivalry week.
Mhm.
I mean, we actually be a little bit surprised that we didn't get something, and they would be surprised if we didn't call them with a problem during that week, because that was just pretty commonplace.
Mhm.
And so we weren't shocked to get a call when it was a dead ram hanging over the goalpost. That was pretty shocking. And we were pretty fortunate that we were able to find out who it was and deal with it. It's one of those things. Had they not had people over there call the media, it might not have been as big a story. But because there's been other things in rural Utah. I know of one school that's the Rabbits, uh, and their rival school had some kids just shoot up a whole bunch of dead rabbits, and all of the light reflector poles from their town to the town of the Rabbits had dead rabbits on all the reflector poles, and on their football field they had all these dead rabbit guts, but the media wasn't aware of that, so there's been other things that people have done, but uh, ours got to the media and it got there quick, and you know
Well, that's a big thing. I mean, I can see why it got there, like, physically and how did they
Apparently,
get it down?
well, it had the chains, and so the bottom of the chain, they were able to. It wasn't a too big of a challenge to
Ugh.
get it
yeah,
down.
before I dig into some of my questions for this story, I want to go back, rewind to the kitty litter part that you had because you're Wildcats. Now,
That's where
this,
you're still at? You're still back
yeah,
there?
well,
We've
just
moved
because
on,
I
Dustin.
can't get past the statement of the rationale of doing kitty litter for a Wildcat. There ain't a
Well,
Wildcat gonna be using kitty litter. Just gonna throw that
well,
out there.
Well, that's
we're
way
referred to as
betterment
the
than
cat.
animals, though, Dustin. This is a
Well,
way better thing to do.
I said
Yeah.
I'm gonna get to that point. I'm just saying that point doesn't make sense to me. That why
Well,
you
we're
use
we're
kitty
we're
litter
referred
for a
to as the
Wildcat.
cats. I mean, we're the Wildcats, but for short. Often in cheers and different things. Go Cats. Uh, and so whatever angle anybody can take to
So,
try to have some fun with.
Whatever
so basically,
humane
what you're saying
angle
is
anyone can take.
Utah does it a whole different level than some other places in the country.
Well, I hope there's not too many more levels of going beyond
Right.
that,
Whew.
that story. But like I say, I mean, I know some farmers that would come out guns blazing if they heard or knew somebody was going after their
But you think
animal.
about farmers or PETA
I
or
was
I
going to
mean,
say,
there's
where
all
about
kinds of
PETA?
stuff,
Hmm.
but that in the moment seems like a great idea for kids, which really, I mean, the three of us can sit here and say, what a terrible idea. That absolutely, I mean, no part of that makes sense. And I'm sure said kid did not operate solely by himself. I mean, you think about the whole process. Now, I know
I
there's
don't,
some kids that can shoot some animals, but hauling it out there, scaling a fence, or finding a way in, whatever they had to do, all the trouble they went to get this ram hung over the goalpost, they surely couldn't have acted alone.
There was about 5 of them that brainstormed, carried it out, and
none of them were like, this might not be a good idea. Like, I mean, I know they're kids, but
well, through the history of the rivalry, sometimes some people will see it as a way to get some hero status, you know, and that's kind of one of the ways it was looked at. I mean, today's world, PETA, some of those groups, boy, they would ensure that there was some pretty heavy things to come down. And I will say, with the crazy rivalry we've had with them, it did have a good change in that rivalry, and that is we did a combined basketball night, girls basketball, boys basketball. We actually even did wrestling a couple of years before the 2 games, and we had it in our big arena next to our building. And it was a game where the entire proceeds went to cancer uh, and cancer victims and families. And we would have a lot of people, cancer survivors, there at the game, recognized and things. And it was kind of because a lot of, even the adults in the communities, they think the hijinks is kind of cool and funny, because yeah, they're not like us and have to spend a bunch of hours dealing
Right.
with it. But it was kind of when we started that cancer cause night of games, it actually kind of threw a lot of the kids and even the parents, that sometimes I think some parents even promote some of this stuff. it kind of threw them for a loop because we come together for such a great cause. You're not going to taint that great cause by doing some stupid stuff. And one thing that we look back on and see how things have improved with the hijinks and the over the top stuff is when we started doing that. Uh, we weren't in the same league because we were a classification above, but when we got put in the same league, nobody wanted to give up their region game home site to do that. So it went away a few years back, but it helped kind of end some of the over the top rivalry problems.
So, Rich, you said that you're in a three
Three high
school
school.
district, and this was one of the schools in that district.
Yes,
So, how far away is said school?
15 minutes.
Okay. So, did the other school that wasn't a part of this decide, I want to try to one up what's going on, or I want to try to be involved in this with either one of the schools?
No, we didn't have anything. I mean, probably the next year or the next rivalry week game, we probably up the security even more through the night, the
The
whole week.
school or at the farms around the town?
At school.
Sure. Uh, I
But I
think
also
that
think
it's awesome.
some kids also probably viewed what happened to the kids that were involved, and also what could have happened. Even though some of them took some hero status from it, they also probably saw it wasn't worth it. We also kids involved weren't going to be able to do a winter sport.
Good.
That involved a couple of kids that would have, but also that maybe saved him from getting cut, because now a coach also doesn't have as much trust in some people to have them on their team. The next
Were
season.
they seniors?
Yes.
I think it's really awesome that you were able to kind of turn this I don't know the word I'm looking for, but a bad, very bad situation into something good and making it, a cancer fundraiser and something that brings the communities together instead of tear them apart. So I think that's super awesome. But I also, in the beginning of this episode, you said you didn't think you were going to top anybody. And I'm going to go ahead and say for the Extreme Award, you own that right now, and I really hope no one takes that away from you, because this is definitely an extreme story where, as an animal lover, as somebody who very much believes in, like, I guess, life in all forms, that would be hard for me, I think, as an AD to see that happen, because I would feel so bad for this poor ram who clearly, and I mean, let's also talk about how it could have gone. They had a gun out on a field and it was probably dark. Like, that could have gone way worse
Yeah.
for those kids than what happened. I mean, it sounds like there was, two sheep that were involved, and who knows what else, or rams that were involved in. But I just think about all of the ways this story could actually be worse than it is.
Mhm.
So it could be scary, and also, you also, as an athletic director and as an assistant principal, you don't have control over what they're doing at night.
Yeah.
But yet,
Well,
you're the one dealing with it.
yeah, and you can promote good sportsmanship all day, every day, all year, but all it takes is one kid with a harebrained idea. Yeah.
Or
That's the world we live in.
which is baffling some people, that we make our living based off the decisions of 12 to 18-year-old kids sometimes. And we were all 12 to 18-year-old kids at some point, and sometimes I reside in that mindset a lot more than I probably want to. But the reality is, in that situation, I'm trying to figure out what was your reaction when that phone call happened? Because I know, there was some back and forth over the years, but at some point that conversation had to be had that said, Hey, Rich, you aren't going to believe this, but there is a ram, dead ram, hanging from our goalpost. What was that discussion like with that fellow administrator?
Well, we, we're used to dealing with the unexpected. I could probably write a book, and I may someday, about just my experiences as a assistant principal and an AD. But we immediately went to work after getting that call from the other rival school administration. Is how do we, you know, try to make it right, find out who did it, leap into action on our part, and so that's what we immediately went to work on. That's what we do as ads. We roll up our sleeves and jump into it, and so we spent that day with law enforcement trying to you know get some positive efforts on our part to make it right, to deal with it appropriately, and
And there was no denying that it was your kids. You couldn't be like, "Are you sure this was our students?" Like, you couldn't pull one of those cards in
no,
this situation.
I mean it did fire them up. I mean we should have won that game by 2 touchdowns or more, and we lost it, and and that's the other thing some kids don't always think about is you don't need to give a rival school extra motivation, uh, and it did, and it ended our season that night.
Well, and I think about a couple things. You said you're an early riser, you get up at 4 to exercise. I'm sure at some point while you're exercising, whether on the treadmill or running or whatever you were doing, you did not get up thinking, this is what I'm dealing with today. I'm going to school and I'm dealing with a ram hanging on a goalpost. That is not something that goes through your mind. So as we think about takeaways from the story, as you look about, we've got we've got listeners that could be 2 months into the job as an AD, they could be 20 years into the job as an AD, and they may not have seen this situation. So I think for me the takeaway is the flexibility you have to have as an administrator, because you may have had a plan of what you're going to do that day, and all of a sudden it is all superseded by this one event, and it's so time consuming that you have to deal with. But you can't just say, "No, I've got this plan. I'm not dealing with that situation." You just got to adjust to whatever's thrown your way.
Well, we learn to expect the unexpected. We also learn to stay level-headed, cool, calm, and have a wide lens as we deal with situations. Obviously there was having to deal with parents, multiple parents. That's not something you do in an hour.
Mhm.
Uh,
Well, that was gonna be my next question is, I wanna know the reactions of the parents, and I also wanna know the reaction of your coach.
Coach was very supportive. Those players didn't get a play in the game that night, and coach wasn't happy that that kind of takes takes the story of the night and the game, the motivation that goes to the other team, the other team's fans. So coach was supportive. I've learned as an assistant principal and an AD, parents view things as the two of entirely different when it's their kids.
No.
And big surprise, right?
Yeah. Well,
And so there were parents. Well, it's just kids having fun, boys being boys, and
That's how I get fired up right there.
and so because that's the other book I'm going to write someday is all of my experiences with parents. I have up here on my wall behind me that every athletic parent or parent in my assistant principal world, they see a quote on the wall behind me, and it's a parental philosophy from my father-in-law that I already spoke about, he played college basketball at Colorado State. His one son was a Division I teammate of mine. The other son played college basketball, and the other son was a starting offensive lineman at Memphis State. Beat Alabama his senior year, and his quote on the wall above me here: prepare the child for the path rather than prepare the path for the child. And unfortunately, as time goes on, we see more and more parents who want to somehow manipulate or fix that path for their kids rather than they're going to take the approach of prepare that kid for the path ahead. There's going to be disappointments, there's going to be failures, there's going to be learning lessons. Support those learning lessons. Teach them to fail forward. Don't try to go after the coach. Don't try to go after the administrator that's had to deal with some of those situations. And so, yeah, that was one of many situations with the ram hanging over the goalpost. That those darn administrators, they just don't want kids to have fun, and they take it too serious and things. I can live in that lane. I've lived in that lane for 24 years of you're not going to have win-win situations in everything. You're the person that has to deal with the hard things, so you're going to be the bad person because you had to deal with it.
So you're saying athletic administration or administration as a whole is not full of rainbows and unicorns all the time?
Well,
No, it's full of rams,
there's only
storms, and fires.
only certain good doctors that live in that world, out in Arkansas.
And it's good. I'm so glad to hear that your coach was on the same side with you, because I think it's easy to think like, oh, well, of course the coach should be supportive. But I've had coaches who were supportive of teaching student athletes to become good people and good citizens. And I've also had coaches where the only thing that mattered was the game that night. Mm-hmm. So in this situation, I think that's awesome that he saw the bigger picture and was able to actually, try to get his team, I guess, to focus on the game again, because that had to be a huge task at hand for him to just be like, no, we're focusing on this, not what happened, not the kids that were lost. Because that's what you said, 5 kids. That's a lot of kids. I'm guessing they might have been starters.
Say that again.
I said, I'm guessing they might have been starters too.
Yeah, the 2 that were on the team were, and I wouldn't call them the mainstays or the best players. Mm-hmm. I think your trusted leaders, your trusted players on most every team wouldn't be the guys that would come up with a harebrained idea here. Mm-hmm. That at least they would process enough to think, this is going to take over the night's game focus and things. And plus, if you got a big game that means whether you're advancing the next, to the playoffs, what are you doing out after midnight, 2 a.m, doing something like this, and that alone, any coach who's a coach of substance and integrity is going to say, if it's not important for you to get ready for this game, go to bed at a decent hour, you don't deserve to mm-hmm. wear the uniform and go suit up and give it your best.
Yeah. And I think that's a really important thing that we touch on, because, you're talking about how parents don't necessarily always see you as the good guy, but sometimes that happens internally, right? If you don't have that coach that's seeing the bigger picture and only cares about the game that night. And I think that's a good thing for us to that didn't happen here, and that's awesome, but I think it's a great thing for us to even talk about, because I think some people are in that situation. And that's a hard situation to be in when you have to internally fight with parents and also possibly your coach. So I'm glad that you didn't have to do that. And I'm still upset by this whole story.
Well, I think a lot of it proves we're not robots. You don't program us to say you don't have emotion, or you don't deal with this, or you don't get to, this is how you deal with a hard situation. It's not cookie cutter approach. And reality is we all three go home at night, and at some point we've got to deal with whatever decisions we make. And we've had coaches that would have said, "Hey, I'm all for reprimanding them, but can we wait 3 weeks to do that? Can this investigation take a little longer? Can we draw this out to?" Um, but at the end of the day, there's never a wrong time to do the right thing.
Right.
There are hard times to do the right thing, but there's never a wrong time to do the right thing. And kudos to you and your administrative team and your coach for saying, all right, this may not be the most ideal, but it's the right thing to do. And we'll accept it because it is the right thing to do.
And we felt like we handled it well. I mean, there was obviously a time factor with the game involved. And by the time we, investigated, interviewed kids, we got the first kid with the surveillance. Then we had to find out who the others involved were, and all that's time consuming. And then you got a game coming up, and so you do have some urgency as far as decisions, but you want to at least allow the time to make sure you're making the right decisions. Uh, to make sure we're in the right path.
Well, you casually said you got a game to get ready for, but this is not just a game. This is a game with a rival with postseason implications on it. So there's a lot to get ready for. I mean, I know what my Fridays look like when we're about to play a game, period, not just a big game. But I know how crazy that is, and to have that interrupted by this event and still have to have the game that night. I mean, there's just multiple hats, and you're juggling machetes is what I call it sometimes. You're just trying to make sure that everything happens like it's supposed to happen. But there was a big wrinkle thrown in this day of planning and this day of getting ready. So that's all part of the process and part of what we deal with as administrators. That sometimes it can go smooth off the tracks, and we've got to figure out how to get the train back to where it's supposed to be on the tracks and make sure that everything happens. And sometimes people don't know all the mess we had to deal with to make sure that something happens.
Well, and then that's the best part, though. If nobody knows all the mess you're doing, then you're doing a good job. But then nobody knows all the mess
they knew
you're
the mess
doing.
Here because they had all those TV outlets there
They
that
did
were
know the mess that day.
It's kind of hard to camouflage that and say that's not all.
Rich's mess was very public that day.
But even if it didn't have playoff implications, it is the rivalry football game that is the circled game on the schedule for the season. And and then you deal with the game. Well, is there going to be some heightened emotions with their people,
retaliation, whatever,
and our
protesting?
People,
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Now you worry about, hey, is there going to be any fisticuffs after the game, or those things are always a possibility too. And so it has a lot of different layers to it.
We talked about this at the beginning. You talked about not being able to top Becky Moran, and I know Danielle pointed out that you've got the most extreme award. But what's fascinated me is that when we've had these ADs on from across the country, just their story and how unique that is. And I think that's important to what we're doing and why we're doing it, because there are stories, and it's not that we're trying to one-up one another. It's just stuff that we're dealing with. This is life. And this is life as an athletic administrator. And even the great GOAT, Rich Barton, has had to deal with a situation that I haven't heard of from anywhere else. And I know that I've been a part of some rivalries, and now people say kids can't have fun anymore. You're fun haters. You're the
fun suckers. Yeah, we're fun suckers.
Right. You're just the vampire in the room. You take out the fun. You just suck the air out and try to make it less fun for everybody. But the reality is we all have a story, and we all deal with stories on a daily basis. And for that matter, it's Rich's story. We're not comparing it to Three Socks Moran, or we're comparing it to Throny's Shriner car event or Code Red or whatever it may be. That we each have a story and we each can tell stories. And I think that's part of this process. We're getting to just visit with ADs across the country, stories that they dealt with that, as you said, are maybe unusual, that are not common for us to deal with. This wasn't an everyday thing for you. This is a one-time event that you dealt with. And now you can look back on it and say, holy smokes, that really just happened.
I am looking forward to reading your book with all of these crazy stories.
Yeah,
that's going to be a big seller.
I just find it fascinating how there's so many unique ones and they're all over. And the one thing, especially, I needed to hear this when I was a first time young AD. I needed to hear that you're not alone when you're going through this. You're not a bad AD because this happened on your campus. And that's something that I took hard when I was younger and I first started out, because I was like, what did I do wrong? What did I do wrong? How can I make it not happen next time? And I always want to be continually learning and improving. So that was just my mind frame. So something like this is like what I needed to hear. And I hope that there are some young ADs who are listening and can kind of have that takeaway where if something crazy happens, like, fix it, deal with it, but don't take it so personally, so hard, because we can't control what they're doing at midnight or 2 a.m.
Well, I've said it before. Our stewardship in our buildings, it has the most stakeholders. The number of head coaches, assistant coaches, and student participants. There's nobody else on our campus that has that big a stewardship. And it's an every day of the year stewardship, and all of the good things we can promote, we can teach, we can emphasize. All it takes is one kid or one coach and one moment and a harebrained idea without proper processing, and our world can be turned upside down in a heartbeat. And that's a weight on his shoulders that, yeah, we understand it as athletic administrators, but how many other people in our education system understand the gravity of that? There's not a lot of other people that understand that, but it doesn't go away. I went on spring break. Last week or so, I'm dealing with stuff every day. It's not something that leaves us in the summer. We're dealing with stewardship responsibilities, and we hope our leaders, our coaches, assistant coaches, we hope the coaching up that we've done sinks in, and that what they pass on to their participants sinks in to where they do the right thing. But as we know, as Dustin said, dealing with the age group we deal with and the underdeveloped brains, we're gonna deal with the unexpected and some big challenges.
Now, Danielle, I get a hard time because I just jump off in the deep end sometimes, or I get really deep. But man, Rich didn't even go to the shallow end. He just goes straight off the diving board right to the way deep and said, "This is where we're going."
We needed it today. Today we needed to be there.
Yeah, I will tell you, I've been a part of some rivalries where at the collegiate level, there were some fountains, and maybe they took some laundry soap or some dishwashing liquid and put it in the fountain. And so you just have bubbles everywhere because they just flows and keeps on going. But I have never once had somebody hang a live animal, which was once a live animal, hanging from a goalpost. So Rich,
and left a wounded one somewhere too. Well, I am going to say this. If that story finishes the year as one of the most extreme, the good doctor's going to owe me something.
But I'll tell you this: if that ends the year of it, I'll take care of that. But if it ends our podcast as a whole, Rich, I don't know that
we're coming after you.
But I do
Uh,
want to say, Rich, I appreciate your friendship. I appreciate your mentorship. I appreciate what you do for our profession, and I appreciate your willingness to come on here and share really a not comfortable story. To be honest with you, something that you had to deal with that is a little different than the realm of which we've operated in to this point, but it's valuable in that it can happen to any one of us. And this situation can happen. And the resolve that you guys showed, the commitment, the networking that you were able to do amongst yourselves and administration from your campus and the other campus, and to be able to solve the problem. And kudos to your SRO folks and your police that were able to crack that code real quick, um, and really help you apprehend said suspects. But again, I want to thank you for jumping on here, being willing to jump on our podcast and tell your story and let the world hear that even the great past president, Hall of Fame award winner, all kinds of stuff Rich Barton deals with some of the same mess we all deal with.
Well, appreciate both of you and what you're doing with the podcast, and even being hard enough up to have somebody out west like myself involved.
I just, I don't, I have always wanted to go to some of your state parks in Utah, and now I'm like questioning a lot of things in Utah.
Well, I do know this. I know a great tour guide. If you go out there, there's a great tour guide that can show you around out there, and you're talking to him today. And
That's
it's not
right.
the good doctor. It is the goat.
Yeah, Doug's came out and stayed with us, and we've taken some of the scenic loops. It is one of the prettiest parts of our country, and some of the best national parks. And I won't take you to any of those dangerous farm fields. You know,
It's good to know. Yes. Well, thank you very much for being with us today, and thank you to Take It Spigot for sponsoring this extreme episode. And we will be back next week with some more. Thank you, everyone.